It was a crisp, sunny morning in the mid-sized town and the courthouse buzzed with its usual blend of tension and routine. The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the murmur of conversations echoed faintly against the walls. Lawyers in dark suits hurriedly shuffled papers, their polished shoes clicking on the tiles, while court clerks organized files with precise efficiency. Spectators trickled into the rows of chairs, some arriving early to witness minor hearings, others simply curious about the proceedings. Amid the crowd, there was an unusual mix of anxiety and anticipation that filled the air like static before a storm. Among the attendees was Little, a 3-year-old with wide, curious eyes and a mop of soft brown curls that framed her small face. She clutched her mother's hand tightly as they navigated the crowded waiting area. Tiny sneakers made soft squeaks against the polished floor, and she bounced slightly on her heels, unable to remain still. Her mother gently tugged her forward, whispering reassurances. "Almost there, sweetie. Just a few more steps," she murmured, her tone calm but tinged with fatigue. However, was already captivated by the unusual surroundings. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood, ink, and the subtle, antiseptic scent typical of government buildings, scents unfamiliar to most children, yet strangely intriguing too. Today was supposed to be a routine morning. The hearing was scheduled for a minor procedural matter, nothing extraordinary, but an unusual addition had captured attention immediately. A K-9 police unit was stationed at the front of the courtroom, its presence required for a demonstration on law enforcement procedures. The large German shepherd sat obediently next to its handler, eyes alert yet calm, ears twitching ever so slightly as it observed the room. Its sleek coat glimmered under the lights, and its posture exuded both discipline and latent power. His gaze immediately locked on the dog. To her, it was far more interesting than the rows of solemn-faced adults, the ticking clock, or the ornate wooden benches. As they walked closer to the courtroom entrance, his mother tried to maintain control, careful not to let the toddler wander. She carried a small tote bag containing toys, snacks, and a few books, little rituals meant to keep occupied during long stretches of adult business. However, seemed indifferent to the usual distractions. Her tiny fingers reached toward the dog instinctively, and her eyes followed every subtle movement, the twitch of its tail, the lift of its ears, the occasional shift in weight. There was an intensity to her observation, an almost preternatural awareness that made pause briefly. "She's always like this," whispered to herself. "She notices everything." The courtroom itself was a blend of grandeur and strict formality. Tall windows allowed sunlight to stream in, casting bright rectangles on the wooden floor. Behind the bench, the judge's chair loomed, a commanding presence that seemed to imbue the entire room with authority. Flags adorned the walls, and portraits of past judges reminded everyone of the institution's enduring legacy. On the other side, a long table held files, legal pads, and water glasses for the attorneys. Spectators' benches were lined in neat rows, and the low hum of conversation filled the space as people settled into their seats. For most adults, this scene represented a mundane aspect of civic life, for it was a playground of new sensations, sounds, and sights, all filtered through her young but extraordinarily observant mind. Attention returned repeatedly to the dog. She crouched slightly behind her mother, peeking around her arm. The dog's posture suggested a mixture of calm patience and latent energy, and its eyes widened with fascination. She noticed the glint of the handler's badge, the subtle tap of the officer's shoes, and the precise way the dog mirrored its handler's movements. She tilted her head, studying them intently. This was no ordinary animal. It was alive with purpose, a being that seemed to communicate without words. Most adults wouldn't notice the tiny nuances, the way the dog's muscles tensed slightly when a new person entered the room, the faint low rumble of its breathing, but did. She registered everything, storing impressions with a clarity that belied her age. Meanwhile, tried to engage her daughter in small talk, asking about her toy, offering a snack, and occasionally pointing out the features of the courtroom. "See, sweetie, that's the judge," she whispered softly. "And over there is where the lawyers sit." Barely responded, her attention fixed entirely on the German shepherd. She took a small step forward, dragging her mother gently behind her as if she were being led by curiosity itself. People nearby glanced down, smiling at the little girl's fascination. Some chuckled quietly, thinking she was merely curious, unaware of the intensity in her gaze. The dog's handler noticed the movement and offered a reassuring nod, understanding that children were naturally drawn to the K9 unit, but not realizing that its focus was unusually precise. As the proceedings were about to begin, the judge entered, her robe flowing and heels clicking on the wooden floor. A hush fell over the courtroom. Lawyers straightened papers, spectators stilled, and the officer gave the dog a subtle command to remain seated. Stood on her tiptoes, her small hand pointing in the direction of the dog. Her eyes were wide, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Adjusted her daughter's posture, whispering softly, "Be good, sit down," but was unbothered by instructions. Her attention was fully captured by the living, breathing presence of the K9 officer before her. For this moment was not merely about curiosity, it was about perception. She sensed the energy of the dog, its readiness, its attentiveness, and perhaps even its subtle unease. She tilted her head slightly, noticing how its eyes flicked toward each new person entering the room. She could feel the tension in the room, not the tension of adults, but the underlying currents of attention and anticipation. Though her language skills were limited, her mind was absorbing more than anyone imagined. She wasn't just seeing. She was noticing, analyzing, and reacting in a way that foreshadowed the extraordinary event about to unfold. As the judge called the courtroom to order, a ripple of movement spread through the room. Lawyers adjusted chairs, witnesses shuffled papers, and spectators murmured quietly, remained rooted in place, fingers still pointing at the dog. The handler subtly shifted the animal's position, yet the German shepherd's focus never wavered. His eyes followed every subtle motion. She leaned slightly closer, curiosity transforming into intent observation. This small, seemingly mundane moment, the arrival and settling of a toddler in a courtroom, would soon become extraordinary, the calm before a storm that would leave every adult present astonished. Even now, no one could have predicted what was coming. The room, filled with adults and their formalities, was about to witness a toddler's perception transcend her age, a simple act of observation that would disrupt routine and leave the entire courtroom speechless. Oblivious to the significance, continued to watch, her tiny hand poised, her mind alert. The ordinary morning had transformed into something extraordinary, setting the stage for a moment that would be remembered for years to come. As the judge's gavel struck the wooden bench, signaling the official start of the morning proceedings, the courtroom seemed to shift slightly in focus. Lawyers straightened their posture, flipping through papers and adjusting their ties. Clerks moved with precise efficiency, distributing files and documents as the room settled into the familiar rhythm of legal routine. Yet, amidst the calculated motion, remained entirely unmoved by the adult world around her. Her gaze was locked on the K9 officer, the large German shepherd seated calmly beside its handler. To most adults, it was a routine presence, part of a scheduled demonstration, but for it was something far more compelling, a living, breathing creature full of silent intention. She stood on her tiptoes, tiny hands curling and uncurling as she pointed repeatedly at the dog. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning every inch of its body, the taut muscles under the glossy coat, the steady rise and fall of its chest as it breathed, the way its ears twitched at every sound. The room was filled with the low hum of whispered conversations and the occasional shuffle of paper, yet its world seemed entirely separate. She was not merely looking, she was observing, noticing details that even the adults failed to register. The dog's calm demeanor, so ordinary to everyone else, seemed to speak volumes to her, and she absorbed each subtle signal with a rare intensity. Leaned over, adjusting tiny shoulders gently. "Sweetie, sit down," she whispered, her voice soft and reassuring. head tilted slightly as if processing the instruction, but she made no move to comply. Her fascination with the dog had overtaken all else. People nearby smiled quietly at the toddler's curiosity, thinking it was typical childish wonder. A few whispered comments drifted through the air. "Kids love animals," one parent said softly. "Look at her pointing," another added. None of them suspected that attention was not mere curiosity. It was awareness, heightened by something almost instinctive, as if she could sense the dog's underlying alertness. The handler officer noticed the small child pointing so intently. He offered a reassuring nod and crouched slightly to the dog's level, giving it a subtle command to remain calm. The German shepherd's ears flicked, eyes shifting briefly toward the child, but it stayed firmly in place. His eyes followed every minute movement, the gentle scratch behind the dog's ears, the slight adjustment of the leash, the way the handler's boots tapped against the polished floor. She didn't fidget with her toy or glance around like most toddlers. Her entire focus was absorbed by the dog and its silent cues. As the hearing began, continued to observe. The judge spoke in her measured tones, outlining procedural matters, while lawyers muttered back and forth. Spectators glanced toward the front, some catching glimpses of the toddler who refused to look elsewhere. His mother tried to distract her with small prompts: "Look at this picture," or "Want a snack," but barely acknowledged them. She seemed to sense something that no adult could fully comprehend, an imperceptible tension in the air that even the dog seemed aware of. Occasionally, the German shepherd would shift slightly, as if responding to a vibration in his presence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it created a connection between child and canine that no one else in the room noticed. A few moments later, crouched slightly, bringing herself closer to the floor to get a better look. She pressed her tiny hand against her mother, gripping tightly as if preparing to act on instinct. Her eyes scanned the room, darting between the dog and its handler. Every flick of the ears, every subtle adjustment of posture, every almost imperceptible breath became data in her mind. Watched silently, sensing that her daughter was reacting differently than other children. Had always possessed remarkable intuition, noticing dangers and subtleties before anyone else. Today, in this formal, silent courtroom, that instinct was quietly preparing to reveal itself. Around them, the courtroom maintained its veneer of normalcy. The judge read aloud procedural motions, her voice echoing slightly off the high ceilings. Attorneys scribbled notes and whispered amongst themselves, unaware of the storm quietly brewing at the toddler's end of the room. A bailiff adjusted his stance near the bench, and a few spectators craned their necks to see the young child who refused to be distracted. Yet's eyes were still firmly locked on the German shepherd, and her mind seemed to move faster than anyone could follow. She could sense not just the dog's calm, but also its readiness, its alertness, and perhaps, in ways adults could not measure, its connection to the people around it. Time seemed to stretch as observed, her small body tense with concentration. She leaned slightly forward, pointing more deliberately now, not for attention, but because she had noticed something that required acknowledgement. Her lips moved slightly, murmuring words too soft for anyone else to hear. Yet she repeated the motion, shifting her weight subtly, maintaining unwavering eye contact with the dog. The courtroom buzzed faintly with the dull noise of papers and whispered comments, but for everything else had disappeared. The adults around her were preoccupied with legal matters, schedules, and routines, while she focused on a being she instinctively knew was capable of action and response. As minutes passed, the observer-in began to convert into a silent form of communication. Though she was too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, she seemed to recognize that the dog's presence was not just ceremonial. It carried authority, focus, and an energy that demanded attention. Officer shifted the dog slightly again, using subtle hand signals to maintain its calm. The dog's eyes briefly flicked toward, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed to acknowledge her awareness. It was as though the two shared an unspoken understanding, a quiet exchange between child and canine that transcended language. noticed the brief look and felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never seen her daughter so focused, so intense, so aware. The audience, meanwhile, remained largely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding. Spectators shifted in their seats, some stretching or adjusting jackets, some checking phones discreetly. Lawyers continued to pass notes to each other, and the judge read aloud motions with practiced monotony. Yet beneath the surface of normal proceedings, a tension was building, a tension born not of adult concerns, but of the tiny, perceptive mind of a toddler who was noticing things that everyone else overlooked. His eyes followed the dog's every move, her tiny hands clenched slightly, her lips pressed together in concentration. Something was about to happen, and she was preparing herself in ways no adult could anticipate. Then, almost imperceptibly, straightened her posture. Her tiny hands pointed decisively toward the dog. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and a faint breath escaped her lips as if she were gathering courage for a statement that had been forming in her mind. The courtroom, still unaware of the impending moment, continued its routine. But the small, bright eyes of a 3-year-old were about to disrupt the ordinary flow of proceedings. Something remarkable was building quietly, silently, in the mind of a child whose perception far exceeded her years. And when it emerged, it would leave the entire room utterly stunned. Observation had moved from mere curiosity to something more, a precursor to intuition, a spark of understanding. She could sense not only the dog's calm attentiveness, but also the invisible energy in the room. She felt the subtle tension in the air, the minor shifts in the behavior of the people around her, and even the tiny vibrations from footsteps on the polished floor. The adults in the room, busy with procedural monotony, were oblivious to the complexity unfolding in front of them. His mind, however, had quietly catalogued every detail, every motion, every unspoken signal, setting the stage for a moment of insight that would leave the courtroom in awe. And so, as the hearing continued and the adults remained engrossed in their formalities, barely 3 years old, stood poised and alert. Her tiny hand remained raised, her eyes fixed, and her mind raced ahead, aware of something important that others could not yet perceive. The quiet anticipation built steadily, like a hidden current beneath the surface of a calm lake, ready to surface in a moment that no one would soon forget. The courtroom had settled into the steady rhythm of legal procedure when the tiny observer made a subtle but remarkable shift. Her small frame straightened, her tiny fingers pointing unwaveringly toward the German shepherd seated obediently beside Officer. For the first time, she took a deep, deliberate breath, her chest rising and falling with focused determination. The adults around her, judges, lawyers, spectators, remained entirely absorbed in paperwork and whispered consultations. No one paid attention to the child's increasing intensity, mistaking her gestures for ordinary curiosity, yet was on the precipice of something extraordinary, a moment that would defy the expectations of everyone present. His gaze sharpened, and she shifted her weight slightly forward as if drawing on invisible courage. Her lips parted, and she spoke 2 words, crisp and deliberate, cutting through the ambient hum of the courtroom like a sudden, unexpected note in a quiet melody. The sound was small but unmistakable, a clarity that carried far beyond her tiny stature. The words were simple, unexpected in both delivery and timing, but their impact was immediate. The courtroom froze. Adults paused mid-action. The judge's gavel was half raised, a lawyer's pen hovered over paper, and a clerk's hand was suspended mid-gesture. Every movement halted, every eye drawn instinctively toward the toddler. For a fleeting moment, a surreal silence enveloped the room. Even the shuffling of papers seemed to vanish, replaced by an almost tangible stillness. The German shepherd, alert yet calm, perked up its ears, sensing the sudden shift in energy. The dog's head tilted slightly, as though acknowledging the child's voice and the authority behind it. His mother felt her breath catch. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even imagined her daughter could speak with such clarity in that precise moment. Her heart raced as she observed the raw, unfiltered perception that had so naturally demonstrated. Whispers began to ripple through the spectators' benches. "Did she just say that?" one woman murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. A man nearby shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. Lawyers exchanged uncertain glances, some chuckling nervously, others leaning forward with curiosity. The judge, accustomed to the routine cadence of procedural hearings, paused mid-sentence, her brow furrowing in intrigue. The gavel remained poised above the bench, frozen in time, as all attention converged on the small child who had momentarily captured the room's collective focus. Even Officer, who had seen countless demonstrations with the K-9 unit, raised an eyebrow, sensing that something remarkable had just transpired. Two words resonated beyond mere sound. Though brief, they conveyed awareness, recognition, and a subtle command of context that far exceeded her age. Adults tried to decipher the meaning, some glancing at the handler, others exchanging puzzled looks. It was as if the words had unlocked a hidden layer of perception in the room, revealing the presence of an understanding that only possessed. Her voice, unassuming in volume but precise in tone, carried weight, commanding attention and respect despite her tiny stature. Every eye in the courtroom, whether childlike or seasoned with years of professional experience, was drawn toward her, captivated by the sudden anomaly of intellect and instinct embodied in a toddler. The dog, attuned to the emotional energy of the room, responded subtly. Its tail twitched slightly, and its ears angled toward, acknowledging the unusual communication. There was an unspoken dialogue unfolding, one that transcended words. Its gaze remained steady, unwavering in its focus, and the dog's awareness mirrored hers. Spectators began to lean forward instinctively, drawn into a drama they did not fully understand. What had been a mundane courtroom hearing was now transformed into an arena of quiet astonishment, where a toddler's perception and a trained K-9 intersected in a moment of near-magical clarity. The judge, breaking the silence with deliberate curiosity, called the child's mother forward. "Mrs.," she began gently, "could you explain what your daughter has just said?" The courtroom waited, holding its collective breath. Its mother approached, feeling both pride and nervous tension. She knelt slightly to ensure could see her, and then explained, "Your Honor has always been remarkably observant. Even at home, she notices things most people overlook." Today, she recognized something unusual about the dog's behavior that prompted her to speak. Her voice wavered slightly, caught between disbelief and admiration. She glanced at, whose expression remained calm, almost meditative, as if she had anticipated this exact reaction from the adults around her. The audience reacted with a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Some spectators murmured in admiration, others shook their heads in wonder. Lawyers, initially skeptical, leaned closer, intrigued by the mother's explanation. The judge's eyes softened, her stern judicial demeanor giving way to curiosity and fascination. It was rare for anyone, let alone a toddler, to disrupt the formal proceedings in such a manner. Yet's calm, confident utterance had done just that. The room had shifted from procedural monotony to a stage for a moment of innocence and perceptive insight, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of human awareness. Even the media representatives, present to document a mundane court proceeding, sensed the significance of the event. Their pens hovered over notepads, cameras adjusted subtly, and whispered notes exchanged. They captured not only the words but the energy that filled the room, the tension, the awe, the quiet astonishment that reverberated through the wooden panels. Its voice, though soft, had carried far beyond its sound. It had communicated instinct, awareness, and a subtle authority that the adults could not ignore. It was a moment that reminded everyone of the power of observation, even from the smallest among them. Officer shifted slightly, keeping his hands relaxed but attentive. The German shepherd mirrored his subtle movements, remaining alert yet calm. The handler's eyes briefly met, recognizing an unusual connection between child and dog. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of perception, instinct, and awareness. The adults around them, unaware of the nuanced communication unfolding, could only marvel at the apparent simplicity of the moment. Yet behind the toddler's small voice and the dog's subtle reactions lay a profound interplay of understanding that seemed almost impossible to articulate in words. As the courtroom slowly regained composure, whispers spread like wildfire. Spectators leaned toward each other, sharing astonished glances. Some parents murmured about the remarkable insight of children, while others speculated about what had seen that prompted her declaration. The judge, now fully attentive, adjusted her glasses and regarded the toddler with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Well," she said finally, her tone measured but warm, "this is certainly not an everyday occurrence." Her words elicited nods from the lawyers and murmurs from the audience. It was clear that the simple act of speaking those two words had left an indelible mark on everyone present. Oblivious to the attention she had drawn, remained focused on the dog. She tilted her head slightly, as though confirming that her observation had been received and understood. Her mother, feeling a surge of pride and a hint of protective worry, whispered softly, "Good job, sweetie. That's amazing." His tiny hands relaxed, yet her eyes continued to watch the German shepherd with the same intensity, as if ready to react again if necessary. The room, now filled with quiet chatter, seemed to orbit around this small but potent moment, the convergence of instinct, awareness, and the courage to speak. The significance of utterance began to settle in. Spectators reflected on the unexpected wisdom emanating from someone so young. The attorneys exchanged looks of surprise, acknowledging that procedural formalities had been momentarily suspended by the sheer force of observation. The judge considered how often adults overlooked subtle cues that even a toddler could detect. Officer, while maintaining professional composure, felt a sense of awe at the unusual bond that had momentarily formed. Even the dog seemed to understand that something noteworthy had occurred, its posture calm yet attentive, a silent witness to the toddler's perceptive declaration. By the time the gavel finally struck to resume proceedings, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. What began as a routine hearing had transformed into an extraordinary moment of human perception and interaction. Two words, simple yet profound, had reminded everyone present that insight is not solely the domain of experience or age. Even a toddler, guided by instinct and curiosity, could reveal truths unnoticed by those trained to observe. The room remained charged with quiet energy, a subtle acknowledgement that the ordinary could suddenly become remarkable, and that even the smallest voices could leave the largest impressions. Remained seated on her mother's lap as the judge addressed the audience, her voice calm but tinged with fascination. The words of a 3-year-old had disrupted the normal rhythm of the courtroom, creating a moment that would be remembered by everyone present. Spectators whispered excitedly, some reaching for phones to capture the story, others simply watching with wide eyes. The German shepherd, now calm once more, remained a silent participant in the extraordinary scene. Awareness, focus, and simple but meaningful declaration had altered the day entirely, turning an ordinary legal proceeding into a moment of wonder and astonishment that no one would soon forget. The moment spoke her 2 words, the courtroom transformed. A heavy, almost tangible silence descended, as if the air itself had paused to absorb what had just occurred. Adults froze mid-motion. A clerk's pen hovered over a notepad, a lawyer's lips parted in surprise, and the judge's gavel lingered a fraction of a second above the bench before tapping lightly to regain order. The usual low hum of conversations vanished, leaving a stillness that amplified the extraordinary nature of the scene. Even the soft scratch of the dog's paw against the polished floor seemed unusually loud, echoing in the collective consciousness of the room. Spectators shifted in their seats, leaning instinctively forward, eyes widening with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Some whispered to neighbors, attempting to process what they had just heard. "Did she really say that?" one woman murmured, barely audible. Another man, eyebrows raised, shook his head in disbelief, uncertain whether he had imagined the words. The room, accustomed to procedural monotony, was suddenly alive with a shared sense of awe. The entire courtroom, for a fleeting moment, had been suspended by the voice of a toddler who, in her simplicity, had drawn the attention of every adult present. The mother felt a rush of emotions, pride, disbelief, and a faint twinge of worry. She knelt slightly to adjust, who remained calm, her tiny hands resting gently on her mother's lap. "Sweetie," whispered softly, "you spoke so clearly." Blinked slowly as though acknowledging her mother's words, yet she remained entirely focused on the German shepherd. Her gaze, wide and unwavering, hinted that her attention had not yet wavered. It was a mixture of curiosity and instinct, a childlike fascination coupled with an uncanny awareness that seemed far beyond her age. The judge, accustomed to routine proceedings and the occasional outburst from older children, regarded with a mixture of surprise and measured curiosity. She leaned forward slightly, removing her glasses, and spoke in a gentle, encouraging tone. "Young lady," she said, "could you tell us what made you say that?" Her voice was calm but carried authority, commanding attention without intimidating the child. The courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that this was no ordinary question-answer moment. All eyes were on, whose small frame remained poised and still, as if understanding the gravity of the moment in ways the adults could not. Spectators exchanged incredulous glances. Some whispered speculations about the toddler's insight. Others attempted to interpret her words in the context of the ongoing courtroom proceedings. Lawyers, momentarily distracted from their cases, murmured in quiet conjecture, trying to reconcile their professional experience with the extraordinary situation unfolding before them. Officer observed closely, subtly adjusting the dog's position while keeping a vigilant eye on the interaction. The German shepherd's ears twitched, and its head turned slightly toward, acknowledging the intensity of the connection. For the first time, the courtroom witnessed a silent, mutual understanding between child and canine, one that transcended ordinary comprehension. As stepped forward to respond to the judge's inquiry, she found herself caught between pride and amazement. She explained carefully, "Your Honor has always been unusually observant. Even at home, she notices things most people overlook. Today, something about the dog's behavior, its posture, its focus, prompted her to speak." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the emotional weight of the moment. Spectators listened intently, many nodding in recognition, while others shifted uncomfortably, grappling with the inexplicable combination of innocence and insight displayed by the toddler. The courtroom buzzed quietly with subdued excitement. People leaned toward each other, exchanging whispered observations and astonished reactions. Some noted how unusual it was for a child so young to speak with such clarity, while others marveled at the perceptiveness implied by her statement. The air was charged with a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and disbelief. Even the most seasoned courtroom veterans found themselves caught off guard, momentarily suspended in awe by the intersection of innocence and perception that embodied. Officer, maintaining professional composure, subtly adjusted the dog, ensuring its calm demeanor. Yet even he could not ignore the unusual energy emanating from the toddler. The German shepherd, trained to detect subtle shifts in human emotion, mirrored its alertness, its body tense yet controlled, ears perked, eyes locked on the child. A silent dialogue unfolded between them, one that transcended the verbal exchanges dominating the courtroom. Witnessing this, several spectators exchanged quiet nods, realizing they were observing something rare, a moment of pure, instinctive understanding between human and animal. The judge, intrigued and moved, allowed the room to settle, giving space for contemplation. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, almost to herself. "It's a reminder that perception is not limited by age or experience." Her words, though soft, resonated throughout the room, reinforcing the significance of the moment. Spectators, lawyers, and officers alike seemed to pause, reflecting on the unusual insight displayed by a 3-year-old who had disrupted the ordinary flow of court proceedings with 2 simple words. The courtroom, usually a place of procedure and formality, had become a stage for awe and wonder. Parents in the audience whispered among themselves, recounting anecdotes of their own children's surprising awareness. Some nodded knowingly, recognizing the extraordinary observation skills that can emerge in seemingly ordinary toddlers. Others leaned closer, fascinated by the connection between words and the dog's subtle responses. The air was thick with curiosity and admiration. Even the courthouse staff, accustomed to minor disruptions, were visibly affected, their routines temporarily suspended by the child's remarkable focus and insight. The moment rippled quietly, leaving a lingering sense of astonishment. Spectators, now fully engaged, found themselves captivated not by the procedural aspects of the hearing, but by the extraordinary perception of the toddler. Even casual visitors who had arrived out of curiosity or necessity were drawn into the story unfolding before them. The courtroom, usually a space defined by routine, had transformed into a theater of human awareness, observation, and the silent yet powerful connections that can exist between beings, regardless of age or species. For her part remained calm, her tiny hands folded lightly in her lap as she continued to watch the dog with intent eyes. She had delivered her words and captured the room's attention, but she was far from finished. Her mind processed the subtle cues she had observed: shifts in posture, the dog's breathing, slight changes in ambient energy. Adults around her, still recovering from the initial shock, failed to notice these nuances, yet registered them all. Her awareness, a blend of innate intuition and intense focus, positioned her as the unspoken center of the courtroom's attention. Whispers gradually turned into conversation, subdued yet filled with excitement. Spectators speculated about its intent, the meaning of her words, and the uncanny preciseness with which she had delivered them. Some adults laughed softly, amazed by the humor and innocence inherent in the situation. Others nodded solemnly, recognizing that insight is not bound by age. Lawyers continued to glance toward the front, their previous focus disrupted, captivated by the demonstration of perception that had overtaken their professional experience. Even Officer, despite years of working with K-9 units and observing subtle human-canine interactions, felt the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. Knelt beside her daughter, gently smoothing the curls at the back of his head. "You did amazing," she whispered, feeling both awe and a touch of anxiety about the sudden attention. Responded with a small nod, eyes still fixed on the dog, as if confirming that her observation had been noticed and understood. The room, filled with whispers and subdued gasps, seemed to orbit around this quiet exchange between child and animal, a moment that the ordinary and became unforgettable in its simplicity and clarity. The courtroom slowly regained a semblance of order, yet the energy had shifted irrevocably. Two words had left an indelible mark on everyone present. Spectators, attorneys, and officers alike carried the memory of the moment, a reminder that insight can come from unexpected sources. The judge, reflecting privately, considered the lessons inherent in such occurrences: the ability to see beyond surface appearances, to notice what others overlook, and to act upon instinct, even at a young age. His presence had altered the ordinary rhythm of the courtroom, transforming it into a space of wonder, reflection, and awe. By the time proceedings resumed, the story of words had begun to circulate quietly among the spectators. Phones were subtly raised to capture the toddler's expressions, whispers filled the back rows, and the energy of the courtroom remained charged. Adults were no longer focused solely on procedure. They were participants in a shared recognition of the extraordinary. Seated calmly, remained the focal point, a reminder that even the smallest voices can leave the largest impressions. The shock and silence of those initial moments had set the stage for a story that would ripple beyond the courthouse walls, inspiring those who witnessed it and those who would hear about it in the days to come. The courtroom was still vibrating from the impact of two words when the judge, recognizing the need to understand this unusual display, motioned gently toward. "Mrs.," she said, her voice calm but carrying authority, Please explain to the court what prompted your daughter's remark." The words hung in the air, and the spectators leaned forward, their curiosity now fully piqued. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even the seasoned lawyers paused, momentarily distracted from their notes, as if sensing that this was not a routine procedural matter but an extraordinary human moment. Took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to level. "Your Honor," she began, "has always been unusually observant. Even as a toddler, she notices things that most adults would completely overlook. At home, she often alerts us to things before we even realize they're there. Today, something about the dog's posture, his alertness, and the subtle changes in his behavior, tiny signals that adults might miss, caught her attention. It prompted her to speak. Her voice carried both pride and awe, as she tried to articulate the inexplicable perceptiveness of her 3-year-old daughter. Spectators exchanged amazed glances. Some whispered affirmations, recalling times when their own children had exhibited unexpected intuition. Others leaned forward, trying to understand exactly what meant by noticing subtle shifts in the dog's behavior. Lawyers, trained to analyze evidence and weigh logic, furrowed their brows, intrigued by the suggestion that a child could detect what adults, professionals, even, might overlook. The courtroom, already abuzz with energy, now seemed electrified by the possibility that a toddler had demonstrated an extraordinary level of perception and awareness. Officer, who had been quietly observing the interaction between and the German Shepherd, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. He knew his dog well, the subtleties in posture, the tiny micro-movements, and the subtle shifts in energy that indicated alertness, focus, or unease. He glanced at again, and realized that she had, in her own way, detected the signals that even he, as the handler, would have noticed only with heightened attention. The dog's ears twitched slightly, and it tilted its head toward the toddler once more, as if confirming her awareness. Felt a rare sense of awe. He had seen children interact with police dogs before, but never with such instinctive clarity. The judge, her curiosity growing, gestured for to approach. She said gently, "Would you like to tell us what you noticed about the dog?" The courtroom held its collective breath. Spectators leaned forward, their eyes on the tiny child who had, minutes ago, transformed an ordinary courtroom proceeding into a moment of profound attention. Unfazed by the sudden focus, blinked slowly and looked up at her mother for reassurance. Smiled gently, nodding encouragement. Took a small step forward, her tiny hand still pointing at the dog, her gaze unwavering and steady. She spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "He's scared," she said. The simplicity of the words belied the insight they contained. A ripple of astonishment passed through the courtroom. Spectators gasped, some covering their mouths with their hands, while lawyers and clerks exchanged incredulous glances. The judge leaned forward, her expression a mixture of wonder and curiosity. "He's scared," she repeated, not as a question but as an attempt to process the observation. Officer's eyes widened slightly. The dog, calm yet alert, seemed to respond subtly to his words, its tail shifting fractionally, ears flicking in acknowledgement. Explained further, can sense subtle emotions, fear, anxiety, discomfort, in both people and animals. At home, she's often been able to alert us to things before we notice them. She doesn't always understand it fully herself, but she reacts instinctively. Today, the dog's posture and attention must have conveyed something she picked up on. The courtroom absorbed this explanation with a mixture of disbelief and fascination. It was rare to witness such clarity and perceptiveness from a child so young, and the audience found themselves captivated by the intersection of innocence, instinct, and observation. Spectators whispered among themselves, piecing together the story. Some recalled the precise timing of words, others noted the dog's reactions. Parents nodded knowingly, recognizing a child's unique ability to detect subtle cues. Lawyers, accustomed to examining evidence meticulously, leaned closer, attempting to reconcile the child's statement with observable behavior. Even the judge, experienced in interpreting testimony from adults, paused to consider the insight of a 3-year-old. The courtroom had become a theater of curiosity, observation, and subtle revelation, with at its center. The media representatives, quietly observing the scene, began to record the story in their notes and cameras. They captured the subtle dynamics: unwavering gaze, the dog's attentive posture, officers' cautious adjustments, and gentle guidance. Photographs and recordings, though secondary to the live experience, would later circulate widely, illustrating the rare and extraordinary event in visual form. This moment, simple in its occurrence yet profound in its implications, was already transcending the confines of the courtroom, hinting at a story that would capture the imagination of the wider community. The judge, recognizing the importance of clarity, allowed to continue. "She's always been this way," said. "At home, she notices things before anyone else does, whether it's a small change in a room, a subtle expression, or even the emotional state of a pet. Today, something about the dog caught her attention in a way that compelled her to speak. I don't fully understand it myself, but she does." Her words resonated in the courtroom. Adults trained to analyze logic and reason were confronted with a truth that ordinary understanding, intuition, perception, and awareness sometimes come from the most unexpected sources. The audience, now fully engaged, began to ask questions quietly among themselves. How could a child notice such things? Was this the result of heightened sensitivity, early development, or something more instinctive? The room buzzed with curiosity, a sense of wonder pervading every corner. Even those who had initially dismissed actions as typical toddler behavior now recognized the depth of perception she had demonstrated. The courtroom, once filled with procedural monotony, had transformed into a space of insight, observation, and curiosity sparked by innocence. Officer approached the dog, subtly kneeling to assess its calmness. The German shepherd remained poised but attentive, eyes flicking toward. He noted minor changes in the dog's stance that perhaps validated the toddler's observation. "It's subtle," he murmured to himself, acknowledging the rare combination of factors at play. The dog's posture, attention, and micro-movements aligned with perception, suggesting that she had indeed sensed something meaningful. Witnessing this, even the most skeptical adults began to reconsider their assumptions about children's abilities and intuition. The judge, leaning slightly forward, reflected on the implications. A courtroom is usually a place where experience, knowledge, and authority dominate proceedings. Yet here was a 3-year-old whose perception, unfiltered by years of training or societal expectations, had revealed insights adults might overlook. She allowed the room to settle, creating space for reflection. Spectators absorbed the moment, a mixture of astonishment and admiration washing over them. It was clear that this event, though brief, would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls, leaving an enduring impression on all who witnessed it. Seated once more on her mother's lap, remained calm, her tiny fingers intertwined. She had spoken, observed, and left a lasting impression, yet she seemed unaware of the disruption she had caused. Adults were captivated not only by her words but by the remarkable clarity of perception that had prompted them. The courtroom, once filled with routine procedural activity, had become a stage for understanding, observation, and the extraordinary intersection of human instinct and childlike awareness. This brief moment of insight had transformed the ordinary into something unforgettable, leaving everyone present in awe of the small but powerful voice of a child. By the time the hearing concluded, word of the extraordinary event had already begun to ripple beyond the courtroom walls. Spectators left in hushed groups, their voices a mix of wonder and incredulity, recounting the moment when a 3-year-old had not only spoken but accurately perceived something about a trained police dog that even seasoned professionals might have missed. The tale traveled quickly, whispered to friends, relatives, and colleagues, gaining subtle embellishments with each retelling. The unassuming toddler whose curiosity had sparked astonishment had become the focus of a story that was only beginning to spread. Local journalists, alerted by courthouse staff and spectators, began filing reports, their pens and cameras capturing the unusual convergence of innocence, insight, and perceptiveness. Headlines in the local paper framed the story with awe. Toddler observes police dog's behavior with uncanny accuracy, and 3-year-old stuns courtroom. Social media soon followed, fueled by the dramatic simplicity of the event. A small child, a police dog, and 2 words that left everyone in stunned silence. Photos of tiny hand pointing at the dog, her expression calm yet intensely focused, circulated alongside accounts from attendees who had witnessed the moment firsthand. Within hours, the story had reached a wide audience, capturing imaginations and sparking discussions about child perception, intuition, and the extraordinary potential of young minds. Back in the household, found herself inundated with phone calls and messages. Friends and family marveled at its perception, some expressing disbelief, others laughing in awe at the idea that a toddler could so accurately interpret the subtle cues of an animal. While proud, felt a mixture of amusement and mild overwhelm. "I never thought a simple court hearing could become such a story," she said to herself, glancing down at, who was happily stacking blocks in the living room, seemingly oblivious to the attention her 2 words had generated. Yet the toddler's keen observation, as always, remained a quiet but persistent presence, guiding her interactions and shaping her understanding of the world in subtle ways. Meanwhile, Officer, intrigued and somewhat by his insight, shared the story with his colleagues at the police department. The K-9 unit, long accustomed to recognizing subtle behavioral cues in both humans and animals, marveled at the accuracy and precocity of observation. "She saw what even we sometimes miss," admitted, shaking his head in astonishment. Other officers nodded, reflecting on their own experiences with children and animals, but few could recall witnessing anything as precise and instinctive as detection of the dog's subtle emotional cues. The story spread internally, becoming a point of discussion and admiration within law enforcement circles. In the courthouse, the staff discussed the incident among themselves, replaying the scene in their minds. Clerks who had been nearby remembered the precise moment's voice cut through the room, leaving everyone frozen in awe. Bailiffs exchanged stories of other courtroom surprises, but admitted that this had been unlike anything they had seen. The judge herself, reflecting on the unusual occurrence, noted in her personal journal that the event had reminded her of the unpredictability of human awareness. "Even the smallest and youngest among us," she mused, "could demonstrate insight that surpassed experience and training, a reminder of the innate perceptiveness that children sometimes possess." As the story traveled further, experts in child development and animal behavior began to weigh in. Pediatricians and psychologists noted that its reaction, while remarkable, was consistent with certain patterns of heightened sensitivity and early cognitive development. They emphasized that some children, even at a very young age, can detect subtle emotional cues, body language, and behavioral patterns that adults might overlook. Animal behaviorists confirmed that dogs often communicate through minute shifts in posture, breathing, and gaze, which a highly observant observer, could pick up on instinctively. The combination of these factors created a perfect storm. A toddler with exceptional perception encountering a highly attuned police dog in a setting that amplified her observational abilities. Community members who had attended the hearing recounted the scene with vivid detail. Some recalled the initial astonishment, the hushed silence, and the collective shift in attention. Parents marveled at the clarity of 2 words, reflecting on the simplicity and directness of her observation. Others speculated about what other insights she might possess, questioning whether this was a rare, isolated incident or a glimpse into an unusual but innate capacity for observation in children. Across, the story became a topic of conversation in homes, cafes, and schools, inspiring discussions about intuition, childhood development, and the often overlooked perceptiveness of young minds. The family, initially caught off guard by the sudden attention, soon found themselves fielding requests for interviews. Local television stations sought to capture the moment visually, cameras trained on expressions and gestures as she interacted with her surroundings. Social media posts highlighted the innocence and clarity of her actions, attracting engagement from viewers far beyond. Each retelling emphasized the simplicity of the situation: a toddler, a police dog, and 2 words. Yet the profundity of what had been observed captivated audiences, sparking admiration and curiosity in equal measure. Herself, blissfully unaware of the attention, continued to explore her environment with focused curiosity. She noticed the slight shift of sunlight through the window, the subtle creak of a chair as her mother moved, and the nuanced patterns of color and texture in the room. Every detail became a point of engagement, a puzzle to be observed and understood. Yet, as always, her interactions with living beings, people, animals, and even the energy in a room remained the most compelling. The K9 incident, though now widely celebrated and discussed, was simply another moment in a life defined by heightened awareness, instinctive observation, and the quiet power of curiosity. Community leaders, educators, and child development specialists began referencing story as an example of the remarkable perceptiveness children can exhibit. Local schools integrated discussions of the incident into lessons on observation and empathy, using the story to illustrate how attention to detail and sensitivity to others' feelings and behaviors can lead to insight and understanding. Parents shared anecdotes of their own children's keen observations, fostering a broader conversation about recognizing and nurturing intuitive abilities from a young age. In this way, the ripples of moment in the courtroom extended far beyond the walls of courthouse, touching lives in meaningful and unexpected ways. Even law enforcement officers began reflecting on the implications of observation. For Officer, the encounter was a reminder of the subtle but powerful ways in which human and animal interactions can convey information. The dog, trained to respond to cues, had communicated signals that were imperceptible to most observers, yet perfectly clear to a child attuned to nuance. Shared this insight with colleagues during briefings, emphasizing the importance of considering diverse perspectives and recognizing the extraordinary potential in unexpected sources. Simple observation had, in effect, become a lesson for adults, challenging assumptions and expanding understanding of perceptive awareness. As the story continued to spread, the emotional impact of the incident became increasingly evident. People spoke of the wonder of witnessing a moment in which innocence, perception, and instinct converged. 2 words delivered with simplicity and clarity had sparked astonishment not only for what they revealed but for the reminder they offered, that the world is filled with subtle cues, hidden meanings, and unnoticed truths, accessible to those willing or able to observe with care. The event became a touchstone for discussions about childhood insight, the interplay between humans and animals, and the extraordinary moments that can arise from seemingly ordinary circumstances. By the end of the week, the story had reached regional media outlets, inspiring editorials, interviews, and social media commentary. Community members spoke proudly of the young girl who had captivated a courtroom, while professionals from multiple fields analyzed the psychological, developmental, and behavioral dimensions of the event. The 3-year-old whose keen observation and instinctive insight had sparked the story remained at the center of a narrative that was both inspirational and thought-provoking. What began as a simple court hearing had transformed into a broader exploration of human perception, childhood intuition, and the profound impact that even the smallest voices can have in shaping awareness and understanding. The family, while navigating the sudden attention, found themselves reflecting on the event's broader meaning, marveled at her daughter's ability to perceive and interpret subtle cues, feeling both pride and gratitude for witnessing such insight firsthand. The family recognized that the moment was extraordinary not just for its novelty, but for the reminder it offered, that attentiveness, curiosity, and instinct, qualities often underestimated in children, can reveal truths overlooked by adults. Words and the ripples they had created became a testament to the power of observation and the quiet, profound influence of perceptive minds, no matter their age. As days turned into weeks, Story spread beyond the confines of, transforming her quiet observation into a phenomenon that captured regional and even national attention. Local news reports were picked up by state outlets, then amplified on social media platforms, reaching audiences who marveled at the remarkable perception of a 3-year-old. Headlines ranged from factual to sensational. Toddler sees what experts miss. Police dog observation shocks court to 3-year-old stuns nation with 2 words. The narrative fascinated people not only because of the simplicity of the act, but because it highlighted an extraordinary capacity often overlooked, the innate, unfiltered intuition of a child. Once nervous about the sudden media attention, quickly became both protector and interpreter of moment. She carefully navigated interviews, ensuring her daughter's experiences were represented authentically, while discouraging the more sensationalized accounts that could distort the essence of the story. Isn't remarkable because she's famous, explained to reporters. She's remarkable because she notices what many adults don't. Her observation is a reminder of how much we can learn if we just pay attention. Her words resonated widely, encouraging parents, educators, and even professionals in various fields to reconsider how they observe the world around them and the untapped perceptive abilities in children. The story attracted attention from developmental psychologists and educators, who analyzed the event in depth. Many emphasized that its ability to detect subtle emotional cues in both people and animals reflected early signs of heightened empathy and cognitive awareness. They discussed the concept of sensitive perception in children, a phenomenon where certain individuals, even at a very young age, can pick up on body language and unspoken emotional signals with remarkable accuracy. Actions in the courtroom became a case study, illustrating that intuition and insight are not confined to age or experience. They can manifest early, in surprising and instructive ways. Officer, having returned to routine work with the K-9 unit, found himself reflecting repeatedly on the event. The German Shepherd, trained to detect stress, fear, and hidden signals, had exhibited subtle behaviors that had recognized instantly. Shared his observations with colleagues, emphasizing the interplay of animal behavior and human perception. "I've worked with K-9 units for years," he told them, "but I've never seen anyone, adult or child, notice the cues that clearly." She wasn't just guessing, she was observing and interpreting with clarity that we often miss. This reflection encouraged discussions within law enforcement about paying closer attention to behavioral cues and considering insights from unexpected sources. As Story gained traction, the household began to experience a shift in daily life. Visits from journalists and curiosity-driven locals were handled with care, and the family found themselves balancing ordinary routines with the extraordinary attention surrounding. Yet amidst the media attention and community fascination, remained remarkably unaffected. Her focus was still on small details: the sunlight shifting across the living room floor, the patterns in her coloring books, the subtle behaviors of the family pets. While the world marveled at her courtroom insight, continued to engage with her environment with the same quiet intensity, unaffected by the recognition or praise she was receiving. Schools and educational institutions began using Story as an illustrative example of early perceptive abilities and intuition. Teachers discussed with students how observing carefully, noticing subtle cues, and paying attention to emotions, both human and animal, could lead to profound understanding. Workshops and seminars were organized, exploring the intersection of empathy, observation, and intuition, often referencing the moment when had pointed at the German Shepherd and spoken her 2 words. In classrooms, children and adults alike were encouraged to see the value in listening carefully, observing attentively, and trusting their instincts, no matter their age. The broader community, inspired by Story, began recognizing the importance of nurturing observational skills in children. Parents reported more attentive interactions with their own children, listening closely to the insights and interpretations they shared. Local parenting groups cited this example in discussions about early emotional intelligence, and pediatric professionals highlighted the story as a teaching moment, emphasizing that fostering attention, curiosity, and empathy in young children can reveal latent abilities that are often overlooked in the rush of daily life. Had become, without realizing it, a symbol of the extraordinary capacity within the ordinary. Even psychologists and child development experts noted a deeper lesson. Story reminded adults that perception is not solely dependent on experience or training. Her intuition, expressed in simple words, demonstrated how raw observation, curiosity, and attention to subtle signals could reveal truths unnoticed by those who assumed expertise equaled awareness. Public forums discussed the implications, often citing two words as a metaphor for the value of noticing what others overlook, whether in human behavior, animal cues, or everyday life. Her moment had become a conversation starter about insight, perception, and the power of paying attention. As continued to grow, her early fame remained a quiet but constant backdrop. Friends and family observed that her keen awareness extended into daily activities, how she noticed patterns in behavior, responded to emotional cues, and intuitively understood the moods of those around her. While the courthouse incident had catapulted her into the public eye, herself remained focused on the tangible, the present, and the subtle details in her immediate environment. The world had celebrated her intuition, yet she continued to exercise it naturally, without pretense or awareness of the attention it drew. Officer, reflecting on the experience, proposed a community outreach program that paired young children with trained K-9 units in controlled, educational environments. The goal was to teach observation, empathy, and understanding of animal behavior, inspired by the unusual yet enlightening interaction between and the German Shepherd. Schools, local law enforcement agencies, and community centers collaborated to create workshops where children could safely interact with trained dogs, learning to notice microbehaviors, emotional cues, and subtle patterns in movement. This courtroom moment had, inadvertently, inspired a broader initiative to cultivate observation and intuition in children. Meanwhile, social media continued to circulate images and clips from the day of the hearing. Viewers around the nation marveled at the composure and focus of a 3-year-old whose understanding seemed to surpass expectations. Conversations online centered not only on the story's novelty, but on its larger implications: the recognition of innate perceptive abilities in children, the importance of fostering awareness, and the subtle interplay between humans and animals. Comments flooded in, with parents sharing stories of their children's observations, educators noting the pedagogical value, and psychologists reflecting on the rare alignment of attention and intuition that had demonstrated. Through it all, his family remained grounded, ensuring that the toddler's early experiences remained positive and nurturing. While they navigated public interest, they emphasized to friends and relatives that his abilities were not a performance to be applauded, but a natural part of her character. They encouraged her curiosity, allowed her observations to flourish, and taught her to trust her instincts, all while ensuring that the sudden attention did not overwhelm or disrupt her development. Story, now reaching audiences far beyond, became a testament to the balance between nurturing extraordinary potential and preserving the innocence and joy of childhood. The story also resonated with those in unexpected professions. Law enforcement officers, educators, child psychologists, and even business leaders reflected on the importance of noticing subtleties in their respective fields. Simple, instinctive observation had become a metaphor for awareness, attention, and the often overlooked insights available to those willing to pay close attention. The narrative encouraged adults to slow down, listen, and observe more carefully, skills often undervalued in fast-paced, efficiency-driven environments. A toddler's 2 words had reminded countless people of the profound truths that lie hidden in the smallest details. As the national spotlight intensified, became more than just a child who had pointed at a dog. She became a symbol of intuition, observation, and the quiet, often unnoticed wisdom of youth. Her story, while simple in its premise, carried profound implications. Awareness is not limited by age. Perception can be remarkably acute even in the young, and the world contains subtle truths waiting for those willing to notice. Communities, professionals, and families alike found inspiration in this moment, recognizing the extraordinary potential in paying attention to the ordinary. By the end of the year, story had been recounted in newspapers, parenting magazines, educational forums, and social media platforms nationwide. Workshops, discussions, and public speaking events referenced the courtroom incident as an example of remarkable observation and intuition. Still blissfully unaware of the broader impact of her actions, continued to live her life with the quiet focus and curiosity that had first made her extraordinary. The moment of pointing at the police dog and speaking 2 simple words had become a touchstone, a narrative thread that inspired reflection, admiration, and awareness across the country. Months passed, yet the moment when pointed at the police dog and spoke, those 2 unforgettable words continued to resonate far beyond. What began as an ordinary courtroom hearing had evolved into a story of perception, intuition, and the quiet power of attention. Herself, still a bright and curious 3-year-old, remained blissfully unaware of the national attention surrounding her actions. To her, the world was a series of details to notice, small interactions to observe, and tiny mysteries to unravel, an unending classroom of discovery. Reflected often on how one fleeting moment had shifted their lives. She watched her daughter as she played, noting the same attentive, perceptive qualities that had first emerged in the courtroom. Observed the family pets with the same intensity she had shown toward Officer's German Shepherd. She noticed subtle emotional cues from people around her, responding with empathy and understanding far beyond her years. Realized that her daughter's abilities were not just remarkable, they were a gift, a lens through which the world could be understood with clarity and sensitivity. The courtroom event, though singular, became a teaching moment for the broader community. Workshops and seminars on observation, empathy, and early childhood perception cited story as an example of extraordinary awareness. Educators encouraged parents to nurture children's curiosity, attention, and emotional intelligence, highlighting the value of allowing young minds to engage deeply with their surroundings. Psychologists emphasized the importance of recognizing and supporting intuitive abilities in children, reinforcing the idea that heightened perception could emerge naturally and meaningfully when given space to flourish. Officer, inspired by this insight, expanded the K-9 educational program in. He coordinated with local schools to allow children to interact safely with trained police dogs, observing their behavior and learning to recognize subtle cues. The program emphasized patience, attention to detail, and empathy, qualities had demonstrated effortlessly in the courtroom. Children who participated were encouraged to notice small behavioral signals, fostering awareness and understanding in ways that were practical, educational, and deeply engaging. Singular observation had inadvertently created an initiative that would benefit countless children and families. The media continued to follow the story, but carefully curated their involvement. Interviews highlighted its insight without sensationalizing her, focusing on the lessons the story provided rather than the spectacle. Articles explored child development, the subtle power of observation, and the interplay between humans and animals, often referencing 2 words as a turning point for reflection. Social media users shared the story widely, with parents, educators, and professionals marveling at the implications. The ability to perceive deeply, notice the unnoticed, and trust intuition was not a talent reserved for adults. It could emerge in the most unexpected ways. Locally, the courtroom itself became symbolic, a place where an ordinary setting had hosted an extraordinary event. People recounted the day had spoken, describing the hush that fell over the room, the frozen gazes of spectators, and the subtle acknowledgement of the German shepherd. Judges and clerks reflected on the incident as a reminder of unpredictability and the value of awareness. Even routine proceedings carried a new energy, with courthouse staff inspired to recognize the unique and extraordinary in every day. This moment had left an indelible mark, transforming the ordinary into a lesson in attention, perception, and wonder. Nationally, psychologists, educators, and child development experts referenced Story in conferences and educational programs. She became an example of how intuition, observation, and empathy could manifest even at a very young age. Discussions focused on fostering these qualities in children, recognizing subtle forms of communication, and appreciating the intelligence inherent in instinctive perception. Story, simple in its details yet profound in its implications, became a model for understanding how children can contribute insights that adults might overlook, reminding everyone that awareness is a skill accessible at any age. Despite the attention, his daily life remained largely unchanged. She continued to play, explore, and notice the nuances in her environment. Her parents encouraged her natural curiosity, allowing her to engage with the world on her terms. Her interactions with people and animals remained marked by empathy and observation. While others marveled at her insights, she simply lived in the moment, guided by instinct, curiosity, and a quiet understanding that required no explanation. The balance between her ordinary life and the extraordinary story she had created became a hallmark of her early childhood. Two words had also sparked conversations about the relationship between humans and animals. Experts noted that her ability to perceive the dog's subtle cues demonstrated the deep, unspoken communication possible across species. Workshops on empathy, animal behavior, and observational skills often used the story as an example, highlighting how attention, intuition, and sensitivity could create understanding where words alone might fail. This insight reminded adults and children alike that listening, observing, and interpreting subtle signals are essential skills, whether in personal relationships, professional settings, or interactions with animals. As the years passed, the story became a cherished memory in. People recounted the event not only for its novelty but for the lessons it conveyed, the importance of attention, the unexpected wisdom in children, and the power of observation and empathy. Two words, spoken quietly, simply, and with clarity, became a symbol of potential and awareness. Community leaders, educators, and parents reflected on how a single moment of perception could ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring reflection on how we interact with the world around us. For the family, the experience was both humbling and inspiring. Often thought about the extraordinary qualities that had always existed within her daughter, waiting for the right moment to manifest. That moment came unexpectedly, quietly in a courtroom on an ordinary day, and yet it transformed lives far beyond their home, had shown that even a toddler could observe, interpret, and communicate profound truths, challenging assumptions about age, experience, and authority. The impact of her two words endured, reminding everyone that perception, awareness, and intuition are gifts that can emerge in the most surprising ways. As grew older, the memory of her courtroom moment became part of her personal narrative, not as fame, but as a quiet reminder of her capabilities. She continued to notice, to observe, and to interact with the world with the same attentiveness that had first astonished those around her. Her parents nurtured her curiosity, providing guidance without imposing limits, and she flourished in an environment that respected her insight. The legacy of that day was evident not only in public recognition, but in the encouragement and cultivation of observation, empathy, and intuition within the family, the community, and the broader conversations her story inspired. In the end, the story of and her two words transcended the specifics of the courtroom or the police dog. It became a story about attention, perception, and the quiet wisdom often hidden in the youngest among us. Her observation reminded people everywhere that insight is not always measured by age or experience. Sometimes, it is expressed in the simple, unfiltered clarity of a child who dares to notice what others overlook. This moment, brief yet profound, became a lasting symbol of the extraordinary potential that lies within ordinary life, and the enduring power of two words to change the way people see the world.